In the early 2000s, beneath the cold waters of the North Sea, survey teams discovered something that would challenge every assumption about prehistoric Europe. On the drowned plain known as Dogland, a lost landscape that once connected Britain to the continent, they detected traces of a world that officially was home only to small nomadic bands scraping by with basic survival skills. The real shock came when oil and gas companies began high-resolution sonar mapping in the next days. But this wasn't just a submerged hunting ground. As far back as the 1930s, fishing trawlers had been dragging up polished antler tools, finely worked stone implements, and shaped timber far more sophisticated than anything the Mesolithic was supposed to produce. Later scans revealed geometric stone patterns on the seabed, long linear alignments, circular arrangements, and layouts that looked uncannily like causeways and ceremonial enclosures, some extending for kilometers beneath the sediment, on a scale that would rival later megalithic monuments. The public never saw those images. The data sets and seabed maps were locked away under corporate confidentiality agreements and national security clauses, quietly folded into classified maritime surveys. Officially, Dogland remains a drowned wilderness. Unofficially, it may be hiding the ruins of a forgotten civilization. A marine archaeologist who briefly collaborated with one of the energy corporations later described discovering a concentric stone ring nearly twice the diameter of Stonehenge, with upright pillars lying toppled in the same direction as if destroyed by a massive tidal surge. After speaking publicly about these findings, he was abruptly removed from the project, and his research documentation was confiscated. None of the images he described have ever been released for independent analysis. What makes this drowned stone network so threatening isn't just its impressive age, potentially reaching back over 10,000 years, but its apparent sophistication. If the alignments correspond to lunar and solar cycles, as preliminary analysis suggested, then the people of Doggerland possessed astronomical knowledge thousands of years earlier than conventional timelines allow. Even more disturbing, the structures appear interconnected, forming a symbolic landscape that may have guided seasonal migrations, religious ceremonies, or early scientific observations. The catastrophic flood that ended Doggerland's existence occurred around 6200 BC, when a massive underwater landslide triggered waves estimated at 20 meters high. Within days or weeks, the heart of this ancient world was completely submerged. Survivors would have fled to higher ground in Britain, Scotland, Denmark, and the Low Countries, carrying with them cultural memories of a civilization swallowed by the sea. These flood myths echo remarkably across northern European cultures, describing sunken kingdoms, drowned temples, and stone circles lying beneath the waves. Yet attempts to investigate Doggerland independently continue to face relentless obstacles. Governments claim the seabed is too dangerous for archaeological exploration. Energy companies refuse to release detailed mapping data. Academic institutions dismiss the geometric formations as natural geological coincidences, even when sophisticated stone tools are discovered embedded within the structures, from underwater discoveries to a lonely hill in southeastern Turkey. For decades, archaeologists insisted that monumental architecture required settled agricultural societies, complex social hierarchies, and thousands of years of cultural development. Then, they uncovered something that demolished this timeline completely. Rising from the earth like ancient sentinels, massive stone pillars stand over 16 feet tall, each weighing multiple tons. These aren't crude stone slabs hastily erected by primitive peoples. They're precisely carved monuments, decorated with intricate reliefs of animals, geometric patterns, and symbols whose meaning remains frustratingly unclear. The level of craftsmanship displayed here rivals anything produced by later civilizations that supposedly invented monumental architecture. But here's what makes this discovery truly revolutionary. These structures predate agriculture itself. They were built by people who, according to every established archaeological model, should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers with no permanent settlements, no specialized labor force, and certainly no capability for coordinated construction projects of this magnitude. Yet the evidence is undeniable. These monuments required thousands of workers, advanced planning, and sophisticated knowledge of engineering principles. The precision of the stonework defies conventional explanations. Some blocks show tool marks from implements harder than anything believed available at that time period. The geometric alignments suggest astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be formally developed for millennia. Most disturbing of all, the site shows clear evidence of deliberate burial. Someone invested enormous effort to hide these structures completely, covering them with hundreds of tons of soil and debris. When initial radiocarbon testing revealed the site's true age, coinciding precisely with a period of global catastrophic climate change, something strange happened. Research funding began drying up. Teams were redirected to other projects. Several archaeologists reported being discouraged from pursuing certain interpretations of their findings. One German researcher who publicly questioned the official narrative died under mysterious circumstances shortly after, and multiple unpublished papers vanished from university archives. Early excavation reports mentioned subterranean chambers containing sophisticated tools and astronomical carvings that seemed to depict star patterns inconsistent with the sky of 10,000 years ago. These details quietly disappeared from later publications. Local workers claimed that chambers containing carefully arranged human remains were sealed off on orders from authorities, with no explanation given for why testing was blocked. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond archaeology. If nomadic peoples could organize massive construction projects requiring specialized knowledge and coordinated labor, then our entire understanding of early human social development is fundamentally flawed. If they possessed astronomical knowledge sophisticated enough to encode in stone monuments, then the history of science needs complete revision. Moving from the hills of Turkey to the depths of the Indian Ocean, our second impossible civilization once thrived on a landmass that today lies completely submerged. When sea levels were dramatically lower during the last ice age, a vast continent-sized region connected what we now know as Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. This tropical paradise supported what may have been humanity's first great maritime empire. Legends from across Southeast Asia, Polynesia, and even Australia speak of this drowned homeland in remarkably consistent terms. They describe a sophisticated civilization that mastered ocean navigation at a time when mainstream history insists no one could sail beyond sight of land. Yet their influence appears to stretch across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean, connecting cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Satellite bathymetric imaging has revealed tantalizing glimpses of what lies beneath the waves. The outlines of ancient river systems, geometric formations that appear artificial, and structures that look suspiciously like harbours and terraced platforms. Yet these findings are routinely dismissed as natural formations by institutions reluctant to acknowledge their true significance. Marine archaeologists who attempted underwater surveys in the 1990s reported discovering stone patterns and stepped platforms deep beneath the Java Sea. Their research funding was abruptly terminated, and some claimed their documentation was confiscated after capturing footage of what appeared to be a 5-story stepped platform resting on the ocean floor. The timing of this civilization's destruction aligns perfectly with global flood myths found in cultures worldwide. Between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, rising sea levels would have inundated this landmass with catastrophic speed, forcing survivors to scatter across Asia and the Pacific. This dispersal pattern could explain the sudden appearance of advanced boat-building techniques, agricultural knowledge, and remarkably similar languages across vast distances. Evidence that did surface was quickly suppressed. British explorers in Borneo discovered carved stone blocks matching megalithic patterns found in Polynesia. Those stones disappeared during transport to London. A controversial Indonesian report from the 1970s describes submerged structures resembling sophisticated port facilities. Within months, the lead scientist was reassigned and the report withdrawn from circulation. Even today, permits to explore the deeper regions of the Java Sea are notoriously difficult to obtain. The implications are too dangerous to acknowledge openly. If this maritime civilization mastered long-distance navigation thousands of years before the official timeline allows, it threatens nationalist narratives across multiple countries. It challenges the assumption that civilization began in the Middle East and spread outward. Most importantly, it suggests that advanced human societies have risen and fallen far more times than we've been taught to believe. Our third erased civilization takes us to what is now the world's largest desert. Today, the Sahara stretches across 3.6 million square miles of burning sand and empty silence. But 12,000 years ago, this region was a green paradise of rivers, lakes, forests, and fertile plains. And at the heart of this forgotten Eden existed a kingdom so organized and technologically advanced that its very existence threatens to rewrite African history. When satellite radar scans were first conducted in the early 2000s, they revealed shocking anomalies beneath the sand. Buried river systems the size of major waterways, rectangular foundations extending for miles, and circular structures eerily similar to fortified settlements found in prehistoric Europe. These were clearly artificial constructions showing intentional design and massive scale. Yet within months of their discovery, the scans were classified by military authorities, and universities were denied access to the original data. Archaeologists working in the central Sahara during the 1960s made discoveries that should have revolutionized our understanding of African civilization. They uncovered polished stone blocks arranged in precise geometric alignments, tools crafted from composite materials that shouldn't have existed for millennia, and artwork depicting domesticated cattle thousands of years before mainstream chronology permits such advanced agriculture. But as political upheaval swept across North Africa, these archaeological sites were suddenly placed off-limits. Warehouses storing artifacts suffered mysterious fires. Research reports were sealed or completely rewritten to remove their most controversial conclusions. What little evidence survived was quietly dismissed as misdated or fundamentally misunderstood by researchers who clearly didn't grasp the limitations of ancient peoples. Early explorers had documented even more compelling evidence. Massive stone enclosures, half buried in sand, with walls cut so perfectly they fitted together without any binding mortar. Engineering that would challenge modern construction techniques. One French geologist in 1933 reported discovering a 40-meter-long canal system, perfectly straight and precisely leveled, clearly showing advanced engineering knowledge. His official notes mysteriously vanished, and his memoir was pulled from print shortly after publication. The real threat posed by this Green Kingdom isn't just archaeological, it's chronological. If a sophisticated civilization flourished in North Africa before 8000 BC, it means Egypt wasn't the beginning of African advancement, but rather the inheritor of much older traditions. It suggests that when the Sahara began its transformation into desert, around 5500 BC, survivors fled eastward to the Nile Valley, carrying fragments of their advanced knowledge with them. This narrative is fiercely resisted because it fundamentally challenges how we understand the development of human civilization. Instead of progress flowing from the Middle East into Africa, we're forced to consider the possibility that Africa was teaching the world long before the first pharaohs ever ruled Egypt. Moving from the buried kingdoms of Africa to the drowned shores of Eastern Europe, our fourth impossible civilization lies beneath the dark waters of the Black Sea. What is now a large inland sea was once a massive freshwater lake surrounded by fertile plains and thriving settlements. But around 5600 BC, a catastrophic geological event changed everything forever. When the Mediterranean Sea burst through what is now the Bosphorus Strait, it created one of the most devastating floods in human prehistory. Waters rose with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, transforming the entire region in a matter of weeks. For decades, Scientists treated this as purely a geological phenomenon, but mounting evidence suggests something far more tragic occurred. An advanced pre-flood civilization existed around that ancient lake, and the deluge erased it so completely that only whispered fragments remain in the myths of drowned worlds. Divers exploring the Black Sea shelf in the late 1990s discovered wooden structures preserved under oxygen-free water. The preservation was so perfect, the wood appeared freshly cut despite being thousands of years old. Early reports described straight walls, door frames, and geometric flooring patterns that clearly indicated organized construction by people with sophisticated building techniques. But as soon as these findings reached public attention, government agencies intervened. Research funding evaporated overnight. Several team members left the project abruptly, some citing institutional pressure to keep their discoveries purely geological rather than cultural. Later expeditions conducted privately reported even more extraordinary details. Stone anchors, shaped exactly like those used by Mediterranean sailors millennia later. Pottery identical to early Anatolian designs. What appeared to be outlines of entire settlements extending for miles across the submerged landscape. Yet none of these discoveries ever appeared in peer-reviewed journals. Photographs allegedly documenting the sites have never surfaced publicly. One diver claimed his team was confronted by naval vessels and explicitly ordered to cease all documentation of their underwater findings. The suppression makes perfect sense from an institutional perspective. If the Black Sea once hosted a flourishing civilization, European prehistory requires complete revision. It would imply that agricultural, architectural, and navigational knowledge spread outward from this drowned center into the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Middle East after the flood. The sudden appearance of advanced farming communities across Europe around 5,500 BC would no longer seem mysterious. It would seem like evidence of refugee populations carrying sophisticated knowledge to new homes. Even more threatening is the religious and cultural implications. Stories of catastrophic floods appear in the mythologies of Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Greece, and Northern Europe. If these aren't just metaphorical tales, but actual cultural memories of a historical disaster, it forces us to reconsider the relationship between mythology and historical fact in ways that make many institutions deeply uncomfortable. Our fifth erased civilization takes us to the wind-swept steppes of Central Asia, where satellite imaging has revealed one of the most puzzling archaeological mysteries on Earth. Scattered across the desolate plains of Kazakhstan and southern Russia are hundreds of enormous geometric formations. Perfect circles, crosses, intricate grids, and spirals so massive they can only be properly observed from high altitude. These structures, some stretching over 400 feet across, demonstrate mathematical precision that rivals the famous Nazca lines of Peru. But they're far older, with some estimates placing their construction between 10 and 12,000 years ago. Their creators possessed knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and large-scale construction that officially shouldn't have existed among the nomadic peoples who supposedly inhabited this region. When the first aerial photographs emerged in 2007, researchers were astounded by the sophistication of what they observed. The formations weren't random decorative patterns. They appeared to be carefully planned astronomical instruments, aligned with celestial events and designed to track seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy. But almost immediately, access to the sites became restricted. Russian authorities declared multiple locations to be military zones, denying permits to international research teams. Universities that attempted to organize expeditions found their applications rejected without explanation. One geologist who published preliminary findings later retracted his entire paper, refusing to discuss his reasons for the withdrawal. Local traditions speak of ancient skywatchers who measured seasons, tracked celestial cycles, and built earthworks to mirror the constellations above. Some formations align precisely with solstices and equinoxes, their angles matching stellar positions from thousands of years in the past. But whenever these astronomical alignments are mentioned in academic contexts, they're quickly dismissed as mere coincidence. The few excavations that were permitted before restrictions tightened yielded disturbing results. Researchers reportedly discovered organized charcoal layers and sophisticated stone tools, unlike anything attributed to known cultures in the region. Their work was terminated abruptly, samples disappeared from laboratories, and one archaeologist resigned while claiming they had uncovered evidence of an early scientific civilization. The implications are staggering. If nomadic peoples of Central Asia were conducting advanced astronomical observations and building permanent monuments to track celestial cycles, our entire understanding of early human scientific development collapses. It suggests that sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, engineering, and astronomy emerged independently in multiple locations far earlier than conventional timelines allow. More disturbing still, when independent researchers attempted to analyze the surviving data, they discovered that many formations appeared to map the precession of the equinoxes. This astronomical cycle is so complex, it requires centuries of accumulated observation to understand properly. Such knowledge implies continuity, planning, and institutional memory that can only exist within an organized civilization. What humanity lost when these star markers were forgotten represents one of our earliest attempts to understand the cosmos through scientific observation. The knowledge, instruments, and cultural traditions that made such achievements possible vanished into the political machinery of suppression, leaving us to wonder what other scientific civilizations have been erased from our past. Our sixth impossible civilization takes us beneath the modern cities of Pakistan and India, where archaeologists have discovered something that fundamentally challenges our understanding of urban development. The Indus Valley civilization, with its famous cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, is already recognized as one of humanity's earliest urban societies. But what most people don't know is that beneath these well-documented ruins lies evidence of something far older and far more sophisticated. When researchers began drilling deeper beneath the established archaeological layers in the 1960s, they encountered something that shouldn't have existed: fired bricks at depths that predated known human habitation by thousands of years. But these weren't crude, primitive constructions. The deeper they excavated, the more advanced the architecture became. Perfectly uniform bricks, elaborate drainage systems, and pottery fragments displaying intricate patterns that push the timeline of sophisticated craftsmanship back by at least 2 millennia. Instead of celebrating this discovery and rewriting the textbooks, the archaeological establishment did something peculiar. The findings were quietly archived. Funding for deeper excavations mysteriously disappeared, and the research teams were redirected to more conventional projects. The message was clear: some discoveries are too disruptive to pursue. In the 1980s, Indian researchers conducting core drilling along the ancient Saraswati riverbed uncovered evidence that shattered every assumption about pre-urban societies. Wide roads aligned to cardinal directions, foundations of massive granaries, and water management systems displaying engineering principles that supposedly wouldn't be developed for thousands of years. The sophistication level exceeded anything attributed to the earliest known civilizations in the region. But the moment these findings threatened established archaeological frameworks across Pakistan, India, and Western institutions, the research environment changed dramatically. Funding evaporated overnight. Excavation permits were revoked, and reports were classified under cultural sensitivity guidelines. The riverbed excavations were permanently halted, and the most compelling evidence was locked away from public access. What emerged from the limited independent research that managed to continue revealed an even more disturbing pattern. Multiple layers of settlement showed signs of catastrophic destruction, followed by periods of rebuilding. Burn marks, vitrified brick, and sudden abandonment suggested that some great civilization had risen, fallen, and risen again repeatedly. But the earliest layers consistently showed the highest level of craftsmanship, completely inverting our assumptions about linear technological progress. One private research team claimed to have discovered evidence of advanced metallurgy thousands of years before mainstream chronology permits such techniques. Their samples, like so many others, vanished before independent analysis could be conducted. The pattern of suppression was becoming unmistakable. Moving from the buried cities of the Indus Valley to the towering peaks of South America, our seventh erased civilization challenges everything we think we know about ancient engineering capabilities. High in the Andes Mountains, where oxygen is thin and conditions are harsh, stand walls of stone that modern engineers struggle to replicate, even with advanced machinery. These aren't the crude stone stacks you might expect from ancient peoples. We're talking about blocks weighing 50, 80, even 120 tons, fitted together with such precision that not even a razor blade can slide between them. The polygonal geometry defies conventional construction methods, creating earthquake-resistant structures that have survived for millennia while more recent buildings crumble around them. The Inca themselves insisted these monuments weren't their work. According to their own oral traditions, the stonework was ancient before they arrived, built by an unknown people they called the true masters of stone. Yet mainstream archaeology continues to attribute these impossible constructions to civilizations that allegedly possessed only primitive tools and basic engineering knowledge. At sites like Pumapunku, stone blocks display perfectly drilled holes, grooves with uniform depth, and machine-like symmetry found nowhere else in the ancient world. Geologists quietly acknowledge that some surfaces show signs of high-temperature shaping, possibly involving heat-assisted stone softening techniques that shouldn't have existed before industrial development. In the 1920s, researcher Arthur Poznański argued that astronomical alignments at certain sites indicated construction dates of over 15,000 years ago. His findings were ridiculed by the archaeological establishment, then systematically ignored, and finally locked away in archives where they couldn't threaten established timelines. When later researchers attempted to revisit his astronomical analysis, they were denied permits to conduct the necessary nighttime surveys. Even today, certain portions of these ancient sites remain completely off-limits to independent researchers. Because if the oldest stonework predates known civilizations by millennia, it suggests advanced societies existed in South America long before the accepted beginning of New World history. That possibility threatens too many established narratives to be explored openly. In 1997, Peruvian archaeologists uncovered finely cut stone tunnels beneath one of these ancient sites, tunnels that descended far deeper than any known construction layers. The discovery was briefly announced, then abruptly withdrawn from public discussion. Teams were reassigned to other projects, and the tunnels were permanently sealed. Whistleblowers from inside the project claimed the lower chambers contained artifacts unlike anything attributed to known Andean cultures, including metal alloys that didn't match any historical metallurgy techniques. Our eighth impossible civilization takes us to the Nile Delta, where evidence of sophisticated pre-dynastic peoples threatens to undermine Egypt's position as the cradle of African civilization. Long before the first pharaohs, before hieroglyphs, before the pyramids that made Egypt famous worldwide, there existed a culture in the Fertile Delta region so advanced that even early Egyptologists whispered about it in their private correspondence. The Delta presents unique archaeological challenges. Annual floods buried successive layers of ancient settlements beneath meters of accumulated silt, making excavation extremely difficult. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, determined explorers managed to uncover artifacts that simply shouldn't exist, according to conventional pre-dynastic timelines. Finely carved stone bowls displaying machine-like symmetry. Copper tools of purity and hardness far exceeding what the supposed technological level of the era should have allowed. Basalt jars, whose interior surfaces were so perfectly smooth they appeared to have been shaped using advanced lathe technology. These artifacts quietly entered museum collections, labeled cautiously as unattributed or culture unknown, while the most compelling examples disappeared into private collections where they couldn't be studied independently. The most troubling discovery occurred in the 1930s when excavators near ancient Tanis unearthed megalithic stonework composed of blocks far larger than anything attributed to early Egyptian construction. The massive stones showed erosion patterns consistent with construction thousands of years before the historical desertification of North Africa. Yet when the research team attempted to publish their findings with the controversial dating, institutional pressure forced them to revise their conclusions. The site was quickly reclassified as later period religious ruins, and all further investigation was permanently halted. Additional evidence emerged from the Fayum Depression, where subterranean chambers filled with intricately carved artifacts were discovered beneath later archaeological strata. One chamber contained stone vessels whose inner curvature matched the precision of modern engineering standards. When consulting engineers examined these artifacts in the 1950s, they concluded that the level of craftsmanship suggested advanced manufacturing techniques completely unknown to historical archaeology. The institutional response was predictably swift. The artifacts were reclassified as ritual objects and moved out of public display into storage, where they couldn't raise uncomfortable questions. The greatest threat to established Egyptian chronology came from what researchers privately called protoglyphs, symbols etched into stone blocks found deep beneath delta mud layers. These markings resembled early hieroglyphs, but appeared more abstract, more mathematical, and significantly older than the earliest documented Egyptian writing systems. Our 10th and final impossible civilization takes us to the crystal-clear waters off Japan's Ryukyu Islands, where one of the most controversial underwater archaeological sites on Earth has sparked decades of heated debate. Massive terraced platforms, geometric steps, perfectly straight walls, and megalithic blocks shaped with uncanny precision stretch across the sea floor beneath 100 feet of turquoise water. The official position remains unwavering. These formations are entirely natural, products of geological erosion and tectonic activity. But divers, independent researchers, and even some marine geologists know a different truth. These ruins represent the remains of a sophisticated coastal civilization that thrived when sea levels were dramatically lower, before rising oceans swallowed their world completely. When the underwater structures were first documented in 1986, diving teams described terraces nearly 200 meters long, with steps rising in mathematically perfect increments. Some walls formed right angles sharper than any natural formation could produce through erosion. Others contained engineered channels that appeared designed to control water flow. Massive square pillars stood upright like ancient watchtowers, while other areas resembled amphitheaters with seating carved directly into the bedrock. The deeper researchers explored, the more the site resembled a drowned city rather than a geological curiosity. Yet pressure to suppress these interpretations came with shocking speed. Universities refused to fund formal archaeological excavations. Government agencies issued explicit warnings against describing the formations as artificial constructions. Geologists who argued for human origin found themselves removed from research committees and denied future project funding. Independent divers unaffiliated with academic institutions revealed even more compelling details. Narrow tunnels reinforced with uniform stone slabs. Symbols etched into vertical walls, resembling early Proto-Japanese script. Each time new evidence emerged suggesting human construction, authorities doubled down on geological explanations. The message became unmistakably clear. This site could not be allowed to rewrite Asian prehistory. The age implications are staggering. If these structures are artificial, their construction would date to between 10 and 12,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower. This timeline alone would shatter accepted narratives about Japan's earliest inhabitants, suggesting they built monumental architecture long before the Jomon period that marks the official beginning of Japanese civilization. Even more threatening is the broader implication that advanced civilizations once lined coastlines across the entire Pacific Ocean, forming a cultural network that researchers have long suspected but never dared describe openly. Naval sonar mapping conducted during the 1990s allegedly revealed straight underwater roadways leading away from the main complex, with retaining walls still intact. Some sources claimed the maps showed smaller stepped structures at even greater depths, too deep to have been exposed any time after 10,000 BC. These sonar images have never been released for public analysis, joining the growing archive of suppressed evidence that challenges our understanding of human prehistory. The pattern is unmistakable across all 10 of these erased civilizations. Advanced societies that shouldn't have existed according to conventional timelines. Archaeological evidence that threatens established narratives. Research mysteriously terminated when discoveries become too controversial. Documentation that vanishes into classified archives or private collections. Each suppressed civilization represents a piece of humanity's true story, systematically edited out of the historical record to protect institutions, ideologies, and power structures that depend on maintaining artificial limitations about human potential. The technologies, knowledge systems, and cultural achievements that could have guided our modern development have been deliberately erased, leaving us to struggle with problems that may have been solved thousands of years ago by peoples whose existence we're not allowed to acknowledge. These 10 erased civilizations represent more than lost archaeological sites or academic curiosities. They're evidence of a systematic pattern of suppression that protects existing power structures by eliminating discoveries that would fundamentally transform how we understand human development. From the buried temples of ancient Turkey to the drowned cities beneath Pacific waters, each suppressed civilization was erased, not because the evidence was weak, but because it was too strong. What unites these forbidden histories isn't scientific impossibility, but institutional threat. Advanced astronomy would rewrite the timeline of human knowledge. Sophisticated engineering would challenge assumptions about technological progress. Maritime empires predating official civilization would undermine nationalist narratives across multiple continents. Each discovery was suppressed because acknowledging it would force a complete revision of human history. The pattern repeats across decades and continents. Brilliant archaeologists make revolutionary discoveries, document compelling evidence, present their findings to the academic world, then face systematic persecution through funding withdrawal, career destruction, and sometimes mysterious deaths. The innovations that could have revealed humanity's true potential are buried in classified archives or destroyed entirely. Perhaps most disturbing is what these erased civilizations reveal about the nature of historical knowledge itself. Progress isn't limited by human capability, but by institutional permission. Advanced societies have risen and fallen repeatedly throughout history, but we're only allowed to remember the ones that don't threaten contemporary power structures. The world we inhabit isn't the world we could understand. It's the world we've been permitted to know, carefully edited to hide evidence that humans have achieved greatness far more times than we're allowed to believe.